What's up? This is Elia Einhorn. Welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. Today I'm joined by...
Hey, I'm Amy Rose Spiegel, Talkhouse Music's editor-in-chief.
We have a fantastic show today. The rapper Oddisee in conversation with Sinkane. These are two artists that have shared studios. The guys have shared gear. They've been to each other's shows. Crucially to this talk, they also share a Sudanese heritage.
Another thing they have in common is that they've both had huge years. Each dropped a studio and a live record.
Totally. Now, Sinkane, whose real name is Ahmed Abdullahi Galab, released Life and Live in It, which is this hard-to-describe record. It's funky, it's got Afro-Cuban percussion, rock guitars, bits of synth electro-pop, some reggae. I want to play you guys a clip of Deadweight. Check this out.
Sometimes I feel I'm not my body. I'm just the thoughts that cloud my head.
It's rad, right?
Yeah, it's so good.
The whole album is like that. It mixes genres on every track. And he did that again later in the year with the Berlin Sessions EP, which was recorded in that city at Red Bull Music Studios.
For his part, Oddisee, whose real name is Amir Mohammed El Khalifa, is a rapper from DC who is now based between New York City and Europe. His most recent studio record is The Iceberg, which just came out earlier this year, and he's also just released Beneath the Surface, a live record on Mellow Music Group.
And it's a hell of a live record. Oddisee brought the band Good Company out on the road, and they performed all of The Iceberg live, recorded that, and released that as Beneath the Surface. I want to play you guys a track from this. Check out this clip from the track Digging Deep.
He comprehending heat of summer circumstance. Evil in the corner, in the corner, we can all create it. Never sees it when you're angry, just a shallow gravy. Dig deep before them reasons and we are related. Kill a cousin, easy as a stranger. Picture ain't the bullet, but the anger, so let's get into it. Say what? People say what? People say what? People say let's get into it. Yeah. People say what? People say what?
Good shit, right?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Now, one thing that needs to be noted about Oddisee, this dude is super prolific. This is a guy who's been in the rap game for just over 10 years, but has already released literally almost a dozen studio LPs and another almost dozen mixtapes. One thing that he and Sinkane get into in this talk is that hard hustle that got them the recognition they now have.
Right, and it's particularly interesting because they also talk about coming from families that wanted them to secure these well-paying jobs, but instead coming up in DIY art scenes.
These dudes definitely jammed a Kano.
Yeah, for sure.
The guys also take in the 90s rock star that haunted a young Sinkane's dreams.
They talk about how the infrastructures for new hip-hop and punk acts has totally changed over the last few decades right up to now.
We hear about Oddisee's amazing Hudson-Mohawk connection and how the band Caribou changed Sinkane's life.
And crucially, we get some, as Sinkane puts it, Sudanese dad wisdom.
Should we roll the tape?
Let's do it.
All right.
We have like some mutual Sudanese friends in New York. There's like a crew of us that are young and ambitious and do a lot of things together.
Un-Sudanese things.
Un-Sudanese. Yeah. And it's a really interesting like expat community that exists that was, comes from our families who the expats. But we all kind of like congregate together because we feel different than other people, specifically people in the Sudanese community as well. And we relate through our ambition and through our interests. And we met there at like a mutual friend's house, El Khair, who kind of is a connector. He brings a lot of people together.
Definitely.
He's a really
the maven of all mavens.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And but I remember the first time I heard about Amir was through my sister when I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and she was saying, "Yo, I found this guy on the internet, this Sudanese dude who's rapping, and he's actually legit. He's like an actual musician. He's not like, faking it." And I was like, well, let me check out who this dude is. And I like looked him up, his MySpace days. And there was this article that he posted about an interview that he did saying that he linked up with DJ Jazzy Jeff. And he got his ambition from talking to his father. His father asked him, when are you going to make it? When is this music thing going to happen? And he said, give me a year. And that's the same thing that I talked to my father about. It was the same exact thing. And I was like, yo, it's kindred spirits. This is like an interesting thing. So I was like, I got to figure this dude out. I got to like learn from him. I got to link with him, you know?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. I remember your sister reaching out to me to do some sort of a Pan-African music event in Columbus. You guys were going to university out there.
Yep.
And I couldn't make it. In typical Sudanese fashion, I sent my cousin, which was enough. And he played the event and kept in contact with you and your sister. And then your sister came to New York, and I was back and forth to New York, and we hung out, and we're moving in the same circles. She got an internship, I remember, at Fader.
Yep.
And I was up there because the office of the indie label I was working with was in the same building as Fader up on 23rd. So I would see her all the time. And then in that typical Sudanese fashion, my brother, it was his time to come back to America from Sudan to go to university. He goes to the University of Phoenix.
Yep.
And who do we know that lived in Phoenix is your parents.
My parents.
So who does my brother end up going over his house and having dinner is your house.
Yep.
And yeah, that's how it became closer and closer, you know?
It's been crazy for me because my whole thing, and I think a lot of people who are like us, Sudanese people, our age, we have a lot of issues with identity and our place in the world and confusion of like, you know, where do we reside, you know? And in the music industry, I've turned that into my career. Everything that I write about is that. And I always find a struggle relating to other musicians because they're so grounded in this one thing, you know? And it was a breath of fresh air to meet Amir and to run into him because we're cut from the same cloth. And we're playing different music, but the sentiment, you know, that we put through our music is the same. So it's really, really nice whenever he releases a record. I'm so inspired by it.
And vice versa. I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Being Sudanese and being raised in America and not doing the typical jobs or going the path that most Sudanese parents expect their children to do, which is something that when you come from a developing country, you encourage your kids to pursue a career that is more so safer and guaranteed to generate income. Mm-hmm. So that's why the encouragement of architects, engineers, doctors, lawyers, etc. And you and I, we were the black sheep. We chose to do music. Growing up, when I decided that I wanted to do music and especially hip hop, the Sudanese community where I'm from assumed that I was a drug dealer.
Really?
Obviously, I was a drug dealer. Stay away from Amir. He does that rap stuff. He's definitely a drug dealer. He's definitely a criminal. Mm-hmm. So my question for you was, you came to America and you went to the interior of the country. You were in the Midwest. You were in the Southwest. Mm-hmm. You were around rock and indie culture. Did the Sudanese community and your parents in specific, I always imagined that if the Sudanese community thought that I was selling it, that because you were in rock, they thought you were doing it. Did they think you were doing drugs while I was selling drugs?
No, some of them thought I was a devil worshiper. For real. Yeah, which I think is weird.
There we go. You turned it up a notch.
Yeah, which is weird because, you know, I remember when I was living in Utah, not only the Sudanese community thought I was a devil worshiper, everyone thought I was a devil worshiper.
That's right, because you guys were around Mormons.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And I remember that was back when, I think in the 7th grade, 1995. Yeah. That was when Marilyn Manson was like a big deal.
Sure.
And I was scared shitless of Marilyn Manson. I thought I would sleep with my lights on. Yeah. Because for some reason, I thought he was going to come into my room and eat me or something, you know? And then somehow people thought I was the devil worshiper, you know? I was like the only black kid in school. Yeah. I was the only non-Mormon in school. I skated and I was a devil worshiper. It was weird. It just didn't make any sense to me. It was because I was different.
Drug dealers and devil worshipers.
Yeah, man.
Here we are.
I mean, but it's funny because I always found that to be, you know, the more that I make music and the more that I work on music, I always go back to that feeling and how it made me feel. Yeah. And it still gives me encouragement, you know?
Totally.
In this weird way.
I'm drawing from the same things. There was so many people in the community back home that just thought I was destined for failure and nothing because I didn't go to university. Everyone is an overachiever in the Sudanese community.
Yep.
I didn't go to school. I didn't care about school. So they just knew that I was going to be a failure. And I think my business sense comes from wanting to not make everyone right, to prove them wrong, so to speak, you know? And I don't know, did you have any of those same issues? You didn't really grow up in a heavy Sudanese community. I guess Phoenix is like the second largest in America, next to where mine is, or is it the largest now?
I think yours is.
Yeah.
But I didn't really grow up in Phoenix. So
True.
Northeast Ohio is where I first was around somewhat of a Sudanese expat community. And it wasn't huge, but it was definitely a thing.
Sure.
You know?
Sure.
And I think that growing up, a lot of the people in that community, when they would ask me about music, they would probably the same thing as you. They'd be like, "Oh, well, that's a thing, a phase he's doing.
Yeah.
He's eventually going to go to college, and he's going to do his thing in college."
Yeah.
And then when I went to college and I continued to do music, and they would ask me what I did on my time off, and or are you doing internships or anything? And I said, "No, I'm going to go on tour." It would always be like a confusing look, but you know, they wanted to be nice, but they were just like, you're such a loser.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah,
that's
totally.
what I got out of that whole thing.
Totally.
But you know, being young and angsty and like a part of like a punk rock hardcore scene, not only did I want to prove them wrong, I wanted to like shove it in their face, you know, and say, you don't know me, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to show you this, you know.
Yeah.
But the older that I get, and the more success I get, I'm not really interested in proving them wrong, but I'm interested in the miscommunication that was created between my parents' generation and kids, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's something that I've always grown up understanding, and I was never angry at my father or my stepmother. There is no opportunities like the ones that we have now
Absolutely.
for our parents and their generation back in Sudan. So for them to be able to think outside of that box to see our opportunities is almost asking too much. And I've always understood that and have been very, very patient. You know, they're coming from a place where if they would have encouraged me to be a full-time musician in Sudan, they would have been setting me up for failure. I wouldn't have been able to generate the type of income to survive, especially as a rapper.
Yep.
So they don't have a background to even encourage me to do that. They came to America to give us these opportunities, and they had no idea how many more
Yeah.
were available that were beyond them. It was over their heads.
Yep.
And the older I get and the more I realize that I think you and I are paving a way not only for Sudanese children growing up outside of Sudan, but first generation kids in general who have this disconnect from their parents and learning how to traverse that relationship.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I've done a few talks in like the Sudanese community. My parents, they run the Sudanese Studies Association, and they
Yeah.
have a conference every year. And I've talked on several occasions at the conferences
Yeah.
about my experience being a child of the second generation diaspora and how it influenced me to be who I am and to do what I do.
Yeah.
And we both played at the Arab Muslim.
I haven't played yet.
Oh, you haven't played
I'm
there yet?
playing in a couple of weeks.
Yeah. So I played there, and I did a talk at the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn, and we talked about similar things, being a child of the second generation diaspora and how that influenced me to be who I am and do what I do. And the overarching thing that I realize in those talks is that both generations, the children's generation, our generation,
Sure.
and the parents' generation, are saying the same exact things to each other, but it's the way that they talk to each other, it's almost like two ships in the night, you know?
Sure.
They're not hearing what the other is saying, but they're both saying the same thing back
Absolutely.
and forth, you know?
Absolutely.
And I remember the Sudanese Studies Association conference, I got approached by this man and his daughter, and they're both talking to me, telling me, you need to speak to my daughter, you need to speak to my dad. Both of them, you know? And it was really, it's really interesting to me, you know, because everyone wants the best for each other, and we all want to do what we want to do, but the communication is kind of turned into this, it's festered into this like unnecessary problem, you know?
Well, I mean, we're in a unique circumstance of seeing things on the inside out and the outside in. You just got back from Europe when?
Monday. 2 days ago.
I came back Wednesday.
Yeah.
We were missing each other about like days. I know for a fact the questions that I was being asked I'm sure you were being asked. And let me set this question up, whereas, do you feel as though people outside of America and inside of America feel more comfortable talking to you about worldly affairs because of your duality, and almost too comfortable where they overstep themselves in assumptions? You ever had that happen to you? I mean, the amount of people asking me about Trump in interviews overseas, like I'm an aficionado all of a sudden,
Right.
as a result of my background. I actually stopped and I said, no more questions about that.
Yeah.
I sent it in advance, like, stop asking me questions about Trump.
I feel like, I think it's true. What's funny to me is it's almost loaded where they'll say, so what do you think about Trump? And they got this grin on their face, like they're expecting something out of me
Right.
that I don't know, you know?
Right.
Or like, you're from one of the 7 countries. What's
Yeah.
your take on this kind of thing?
Yeah.
And it's funny because I address this in one of my songs in I talk about how shit sucks, you know? In this time, there are a lot of terrible things happening, but it's always been this way.
Yeah.
There's always been an issue, you know? Like, we were first, I guess the two of us were first consciously exposed to this kind of fear after 9/11, you know?
100%.
And going back to Sudan after 9/11 changed everything. My parents didn't want my family to become U.S. citizens until 9/11, you know, for our security. And that was what, you know, 15, 20, almost 20 years ago now.
Totally. Everybody in my neighborhood turned their backs on us.
Yeah.
You know, all our neighbors.
And then in the 80s, there was AIDS, and AIDS was a big thing, you know, so that there was a problem going on. And in the 70s, there was more issues with drugs and race, civil rights in the 60s, the Jim Crow era. There's the Great Depression. There's always an issue going on in the world.
Yeah, it irritates me a bit because people hear the nature of my music classified as conscious. Okay, it is what it is, and assume that I'm anti-American or assume that I'm not proud to be American. And especially when I'm abroad, people who are at merch tables who come up in conversation, oh, you're American. Oh, where your family from? Oh, Sudan. And then they think that is now a point where they can comfortably bash America. And are oftentimes quite surprised when they discover that I'm very proud to be American, but not proud for the reasons that they think.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm only half Sudanese.
Yeah.
You know, and I was raised by 2 Sudanese people, my stepmom and my dad, but I'm African American and I'm Sudanese. And the African American contribution to American history, I'm uber proud of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of music. Like, do you know how it feels every time I go abroad and I sense what could be racism, could not be? I definitely feel like I'm trained to think everything is racist because of America, even though it might not be. But even in those environments where I may be the only black person or I might sense some form of racism, I will still hear rap music played in that cafe or that club or that restaurant or that retail store. I'll still see our fashion everywhere. And those are the reasons that I'm super proud to be American. And it's really shocking to people when they see the nature of my music and the message in my music, which is very much, I have a lot of issues with what's going on in the States as everywhere else in the world, but that doesn't define what I think is American. And then I ask you, like, are you proud to be from here?
Of course. I think I'm proud to be from here. I think I'm proud of where I come from. And I think in these times, it makes me even more proud.
Yeah, totally.
You know, I saw this documentary on Merle Haggard, and I thought it was really inspiring, something he said about during his time, there was a lot of anti-American rhetoric and stuff going on because of the Vietnam War, you know? And he said something about, like, how, you know, I don't know any more of what's going on with this war as this hippie does, but that doesn't make me hate, you know, what America is doing. You know, there's a lot of what's going on here that I'm proud of as well, you know?
Sure.
So I want to embrace myself as an American. And that resonated with me in a way because America is, you know, a part of a global problem, you know? But at the same time, I feel like there are a lot of us here who are good people. There's a lot of it's really important to present a positive image of who you are and where you come from in order for those ugly things and those terrible things to not exist anymore, you know, and to kind of come away from that situation. So it does make me proud to be an American. It makes me proud to be a Sudanese person as well, and it makes me proud to be a global citizen at the same time, you know?
Totally.
So it's all there. We're all interconnected.
Do you feel like you can have a career, or the career that you have now, do you feel like you could have done that anywhere in the world?
No, definitely not.
Why? Like, because I feel like that too. Like, I'm super thankful to be an indie rapper from America for no other reason other than not having resources and what that does for your business sense.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if I was raised anywhere else in the world and I tried to do this, I don't think I could have pulled it off. Me personally.
I mean, there was the obvious. Like, if we lived in like London or something. I don't
even think I could have done this in London.
Really?
No. Too many resources.
Too many resources.
Yeah, it's too many resources over there.
Wow.
I don't think I could have done it.
That's interesting. You say too many resources.
You know how many programs they have that fund like youth studios and grants to produce albums? I couldn't have that.
You know what's funny? This is really interesting. I've been reading this book called Stretch. Have you heard of it?
No.
This book's called Stretch. It's about the difference between a person who's a stretcher and a chaser. A chaser is a person who's always chasing for resources in order to complete or attain his goals.
Sure.
And a stretcher is a person who will utilize what he's got in front of him and thus act more creatively with the resources that he has and to becoming successful. And a stretcher is more successful than a chaser. And something I've noticed about your career is that's how it seems you work. And I remember specifically one of the first times we talked way back in the MySpace era, I would see that you were doing these epic tours in Europe. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, how the hell are you doing them? And I remember you telling me something really specifically. You said, I set up production workshops with a bunch of people and I planned my tours around those production workshops. And just now when I was in Berlin, I was talking to some people about you and they were telling me that as part of your story.
Dude, those years, I would work with anyone abroad who was putting out 12 inches to make sure that I could establish my name. I was sleeping on the promoters' floors. I was buying a Euro pass, unlimited travel a month, for a month or more. And it was just getting it in. Also, the kicker, I was touring in February and January. I remember getting tickets from Newark for $350 round trip, going out when no one was doing shows, but there were hip-hop nights every week. And I would book it to make sure that I was performing at a hip-hop night. So whether I was there or not, it'd be 300 people there.
Wow.
And that's how I started. So it was really difficult because you imagine everyone in the middle of the dance floor is partying.
Yeah.
They throw you on 1 o'clock in the morning and you interrupt the party.
Yep.
And I remember reading about the Beatles in Hamburg. And it's Hamburg, right?
Yep.
Where their 10,000 hours started. And I remember reading about that after the fact in Malcolm Gladwell and realizing that I had done that to myself. And it really has shaped me as a performer and my career in subjecting myself to 300 strangers and interrupting their party with a vocal live performance. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
So let me ask you this. I come from punk and hardcore music. Yeah. And in punk and hardcore music, there's an established DIY ethos, an understanding of how you can make it all on your own. You don't need
rap is super
many
behind
people
you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and like if you go back, you could read about this in many different books. Michael Azerrad talks about it in This Band Could Be Your Life. You can, if you look up the history of Black Flag, there's a website and a network and a book that is a directory of promoters, people who have a floor to sleep on, any kind of resources, that for touring that has existed. Yeah, it's existed since the 90s, and you look back at bands in the 80s in punk and hardcore, how they would travel in the Greyhound, Greyhound circuit, and they would go to different towns and ask places.
They put backline on the Greyhound?
No. They would book the tour by calling up punk houses all around the United States
Yeah.
and asking to borrow gear.
What's the money like in that?
No, there's nothing, man. I mean,
You can eat though? Like you can live?
I don't even know if it was even about that. You know, you just do it just to network and to be a part of the community. You know, money wasn't that much of an issue. You know, that's how I started. You know, we would tour in a shitty van, play house shows every night, and we'd find these people that would help us out. You know, but I see that in how you started. I see that in this thing that you did in Europe, and I wonder, where did that come from for you? Does that exist in the hip hop scene, or did you come up with it on your own? Where would you get the inspiration for that?
That's funny you ask, because I recently have been realizing that there's all these new terms for what we do, like direct-to-fan marketing and things like that,
Yeah.
that when we were doing it, you'd be lying if you said you were conscious of it. Maybe you were because you come from a punk background, but I definitely wasn't conscious of what I was doing. It just felt necessary because true outlier form, I came at the end of an era. I was part of the last era of when you rap is to do a demo to get a deal. That's very opposite of the punk scene. Everything was about getting a deal. You didn't know what that deal was. You didn't know. It was like the Wizard of Oz. I just got to get the deal. It's like, what? What is it? It's just, I don't know, man. I just got to get a deal. I got to get signed.
Yep.
And that's what everything was about. And I came at the tail end of that, where everything started collapsing.
Yep.
And
Internet.
yeah, Napster is specific.
Yep.
You know, I was at Jazzy Jeff. I was at Touch of Jazz. Studio rooms A through J, largest studio on the East Coast. And then out of nowhere, it's like, we're going to shut this one down. And then Sony and Universal closed down their urban departments, and they moved Beyonce and J-Lo to pop. And artist development programs are stopped at all major labels. And then the internet booms and explodes, and then all of these artists come out of nowhere. And then you start to get these niche artists who are shaping the future of the music industry. And that's where I was born. So I wasn't conscious of it at all. I'd be totally lying if I said I was. But suddenly, I'm talking to a fan of mine in another country who prior to MySpace I never knew existed. I never had a way to interact with them. And they're saying, hey, you should come do a show in Malmo. And I'm like, Malmo? Come do a show? It's like, how do I do that? And he's like, well, I go see shows at this hip hop club here. And I was like, well, who do I talk to? He's like, oh, I know the promoter. And I was like, you think he can give me his email address? He's like, yeah, sure. So he did. And then Berlin, and then Mainz, and then Frankfurt, and then Stuttgart, and then Dusseldorf, and then London, and then Paris. And I literally was contacting my fans who telling me you should do a show here and making them go out and get the promoters' email addresses. And then I accumulated a database of promoters. And then once I got it, I started working with artists. The first rap record to be released by Hudson Mohawk was me. And a lot of people don't know that. He was in a group called Heralds of Change with a guy named Mike Slott. And they were on a record label called All City Records based out of Dublin. And Hudson Mohawk and Mike Slott hit me up on MySpace. And it's like, hey man, I want to do a record with you. I do a record with them. They fly me out to do an album release party. Hudson Mohawk's from Scotland. Mike Slott's from Dublin. So then they fly me to Scotland to do one there because he was from there, Ross. And then from there, I didn't go home. All those people that I contacted, which was Giannis from Jakarta Records. I did a show at a community center in his suburb of Cologne, and I slept at his mom's house. And this is the guy who runs Jakarta Records now. He's one of the first people to discover music from Anderson .Paak. He put out K Tronada's first 12 inches. You know what I mean? Habibi Funk, etc. I slept on his mom's house. She came to the show a couple weeks ago. She's like, do you remember me? Yeah. Slept on my couch.
Do you know other people in hip hop who did that like you?
I'd be doing a disservice if I said no, because I'm not saying that they didn't exist, but I come from Washington, D.C., where we don't have the music scenes of Fifth Ward, Houston, Atlanta, New York, the Bay Area, because while I was doing it, everyone knew Master P and how he started No Limit. And everyone knew about the Bay Area hustle of artists out of the Bay Area selling things out of their trunk, like Too Short, etc. We knew of them, and no one did it. We were too close to New York in the DC area where we were bit by the bug of you must get a record deal and be signed. And there were a lot of indie rappers where I come from, but I don't know of anybody else who was connecting the dots when I was. I'm sure there were artists before me, because that's the thing about DC. If people hear this and they're like, nah, they'll get crucified. People will come out of the woodwork like, I was doing that when you was in diapers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But no, I don't know anyone who was doing what I was doing. And I credit my dad for it. My father always told me, who's a businessman himself, have your hands in as many things as possible. Have a lot of small things, not one big thing. So my goal was to do as many things as possible. So I started making my own beats, started recording myself, obviously wrote my own rhymes, started booking my own shows, and learned everything I could before I asked someone to do it for me. Also another dad lesson. My father bought me a 1984 Toyota Celica as my first car. And it was a bucket. And I was like, oh my God, Dad, this is embarrassing. Why privileged kid, this is embarrassing. Why'd you buy me this car? And he says in typical fashion, Amir, Anna, I bought you this car because anything that will happen to a car will happen to this car. I was like, what does that even mean?
That's like Sudanese dad wisdom.
Right. It's like, what does that even mean? He's like, well, I want anything that can happen to a car to happen so that when it does, you'll experience it, go through it, identify it. And when you take it into a mechanic, you'll know what it is that needs to be fixed and you won't be taken advantage of. And sure enough, bro, anything that could have happened to that car. Timing belt, alternator, starter, muffler, exhaust, ball bearings, motor mounts, brake pads, you name it, coolant leak, whatever happened. But you can see that I can recite all of those things. And when I hear them, I know them. And I took that lesson and applied it to everything in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that.
I don't ask anybody to do anything for me that I don't have at least an understanding of.
What's so interesting to me is I learned all of those lessons through DIY culture.
Got you.
You know? And we bought a 1985 Dodge Ram van.
I want to hear the mistakes. Tell me about the mistakes that happened that you learned through DIY culture. What happened?
I mean, the windshield wiper motor broke in the van
While touring.
And we bought another one and learned how to install it. I know how to install anything in a 1985 Dodge Ram van. It had a rebuilt engine from a Dodge Charger in it. We couldn't go over 60 miles an hour or the serpentine belt would break. I've changed a gasket in that van and found a slice of pizza inside it just kept on going.
Yes.
But the windshield wiper motor broke. We bought another one and it just wouldn't start. It wouldn't go. So we literally put 3 coats of Rain-X on the windshield, and I'm not kidding, wrapped wire on the windshield wiper, so who was ever riding shotgun had to move it back and forth manually through the rain. Okay? So we're driving on 4th of July back from Lincoln, Nebraska to Columbia, Missouri, and it just goes off. Like, I'm talking torrential downpour, the longest like streaks of lightning you've ever seen in the sky, and you have to roll down the window, and we're just like going at it. What are you gonna do? You're just doing that for 3 hours straight.
Jeez.
So nothing phases me.
Right.
Nothing phases me.
Doesn't
that kind of stuff.
But people don't see that now. Like, I just saw you on national television in France. People don't know about Ahmed and Sinkane, who drove 3 hours with no windshield wipers.
Yeah.
And does that bother you? Or do you have to suppress the urge to tell everyone about your history, or are you fine with it? Because I find that in rap, there's definitely this culture of chastising younger generations and people who saying
Yeah.
who don't know about the history and saying, you got it easy back in my day and this is what we did and I'm tested and approved, etc. Personally, I'm very much against that, where I keep it to myself, my history.
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm the same way too. That's all the stuff that I had to deal with, you know? I don't think anyone needs to really know about that, or people probably don't care. I mean, the stories are funny.
But don't you think it's dangerous where we are now romanticized? And I get a lot of emails from even Sudanese aspiring artists who see the end result and not understanding what exactly we had to endure. And the crazy part for me, the scary part for me is if people ask me for advice on how I got to where I am, how do you live in New York City and support yourself and your wife from independent music, and the majority of the world doesn't know who you even are? I don't have an answer for how to replicate that process. And I don't know what to say. You know, do people ask you, like, we came out at a time, it was timing. We were at the tail end of an era. And then social media came out, and then the internet came out, and then direct-to-fan marketing and digital distribution deals. And we had already established ourselves in the older era of music so that we could take advantage of it and be in the forefront because we had already been established before. How do you tell someone now how to do what we're doing?
I mean, I always say just it's all hard work, but I don't know if it's necessary to have to, you know, regurgitate the story over and over again, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, I make it a point when people want to talk to me about stuff to listen and to try to answer as much as possible. I'm not going to come back at them and that's a pretty broad question, you know? There's probably a lot more to that question than we already know. So I try to kind of break it down, you know? One of my favorite things about my career is my relationship with the band Caribou, you know?
Yeah.
Dan Snaith completely plucked me out of obscurity. You know, I gave him a demo at one of his shows. It had my email address in the back. And a few months later, he wrote me and told me their drummer broke his wrist and they needed a replacement. And I took it on, and it changed my life. And since then, he has been a mentor to me, you know, and he brought me into the game and he's been a mentor to me. So I told myself, this is what I want to do for other people as well. So when people ask me that question, I want to start a relationship with them. I don't want to just answer it and just be gone. I'll be like, here's my email address. Let's talk. Let me know what you're going through, what kind of things you're dealing with, and I can respond accordingly. That's what he does for me.
Makes sense.
And I feel like that's really important for aspiring artists and hobbyists and musicians alike, you know, because it all also comes back down to the DIY community for me as well, because that is a thriving community, you know, where people can talk to each other and bounce ideas and just kind of shoot the shit with each other. And that creates an inspiring environment for everybody, you know?
I wonder if it's a difference in genre. I feel as though when I'm asked those questions in hip hop, people want a concrete answer. They want a blueprint on how you did it, and they try to replicate it. And I don't know, maybe it's different from genre to genre. I literally people have asked me, what equipment do you use to make music? And then they go out and buy that exact equipment.
Same stuff, yeah.
You know, and they say, you know, what was the inspiration for this album? And they replicate it. Is it the same in your genre of music?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the same in art altogether, you know?
Sure.
But the thing about that in particular, there's this one book I read that gave me an understanding of how I want to make music and how I want to make art, called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud.
Awesome.
It's a book about making comics. And if you take a lot of what he talks about in this book, and the themes are universal to art at large. And one of the things he talks about is the 6 layers of the egg. And I tell this to everyone. And he talks about how a genuine and earnest and honest, you know, piece of art, if you look at it as an egg, you know, what you're seeing is the final layer, like the shell. But if you break it down, there are layers and layers and layers of how that person got to creating that, you know? But then you also see someone who's copied or replicated that thing. And if you break open that egg, it's hollow. There's nothing in there. And when people do that kind of thing, when they like go out and buy the same gear that you're using, or for me, like buy the same pedals that we're using or something like that, or buy the same, you know, stuff we're using on stage, it's obvious. I'm not saying I'm paying attention to people replicating my music, but like when I hear other people, you know, and it's so obvious that they're creating something, it's not genuine, you know?
Sure.
And I think like competition kind of helps that mediocrity exist, you know? And that's why when people ask me those kind of questions, I want to start a conversation with them, and I want to continue talking to them and say, what are you trying to, where is this going here, you know? You can buy the gear that I buy, and you can use the same stuff that I'm using, but that's not really going to answer your question, you know? So let's talk some more. Let's create a community, you know, and start another conversation. You know, I don't think a lot of artists do that kind of thing because they're so focused on their career or what they want to do. And then
how do you make time for that?
You just do. It takes a few seconds to respond to an email.
Times how many emails?
I mean, how many emails do you get? I don't get that many emails, do you?
You have no idea. DMs on Twitter, Instagram,
We have like
Facebook, my actual web address on my email, on my website. It's constant. And I don't know how to answer everyone. I do at shows.
Mm-hmm.
I'll talk till the cows come home at a show.
Yep.
When I get off that stage, yeah. I definitely take that time to interact and answer questions because I'm curious.
Yep.
Shows and touring is when I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning about other people, what they appreciate, what they don't, experiences around the world. But I don't see how you do it. But you are a better man than me, and I've always told you that. When are we having coffee next? I leave on the 17th. When do you leave?
I leave on the 19th.
Can we
Do it
have,
this weekend.
Can we have coffee?
Yes, absolutely.
My man.
All right.
Kulushi tamam. We're gonna be all right. I love that song, yo.
Thanks, man.
My man.
We're all gonna be alright. As long as we try, we're all gonna be alright.
I'm Elia Einhorn, joined by Amy Rose Spiegel. You've been listening to Sinkane and Oddisee here on the Talkhouse Podcast.
Check out Oddisee's newest release, Beneath the Surface, his awesome live record out earlier this month.
And do not miss Sinkane's Berlin Sessions EP. Also do not miss the behind-the-scenes footage, photos, video that we post on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
And we are at the Talkhouse in all those places. You can also visit talkhouse.com for our rad written pieces.
If you enjoyed today's episode, head over to iTunes and Stitcher and subscribe. While you're there, rate and review, because every time you do, it helps someone else find the podcast.
We always love to hear from you. Thanks so much for listening today.
Peace.
Bye.